Greetings, mortals. Thank you for joining us. I am the Banshee, and welcome to Banshee Horror. Today's story is called The 66 and takes place in a real forest in central Scotland. So, without further ado, sit back, hit subscribe, and settle down to today's spine-tingling tale. My parents died from a mysterious illness when I was only 15 years old. I received a letter telling me I had an uncle I could go and live with. My uncle lived in a small house in the middle of a forest. He was a kind man, but was upset a lot of the time. He was battling an alcohol addiction. I had no choice but to go to my uncle's. Next to my uncle's house was an old brewery. A man lived there. No one had ever seen his face. He wore a long black cloak with a high collar and a black top hat tipped forward covering his face. He had an eerie presence. I was a curious individual who enjoyed spending my time foraging in the forest. One day, I was foraging in the forest when I heard a rustling coming from behind me. As I continued down to the river, I heard more rustling. What was that? I thought to myself. It sounded like something in the trees. I couldn't help but find out what was making the strange sounds. As I approached the tree, I heard a blood-curdling scream. I nearly jumped out of my skin with fear. I turned and ran back to my uncle's. I called out for my uncle, but he was nowhere to be found. At the tavern again, I thought. The tavern was 5 miles away from the house, and I didn't like the idea of walking there as the sun was starting to set. Maybe I imagined the strange sounds. I plucked up the courage to go outside and listen for the noises. I could hear nothing, just the familiar sound of the river and the leaves rustling in the breeze. I went back inside the house. This time, my uncle was there. "Uncle!" I cried. "I heard a scream in the forest." "Your mind is playing tricks on you. It's just the wind in the trees," he replied, the smell of stale alcohol filling the room. He won't believe me, I thought, and made my way upstairs to bed. The next day, I awoke early and decided to head back out to the forest to see if I could find out where the strange sounds had came from. As I passed the old brewery, I could see a girl that looked around my age, standing in the window. Who could that be? I thought. But as I looked at the window again, the girl was gone. Maybe the man in the brewery has a daughter, I thought. No one knows anything about him. I walked past the old brewery and out into the forest, trying to forget the girl in the window. As I started to collect wild herbs that grew in the forest, I once again heard rustling from behind a tree. I heard someone breathing, heavy breathing. I crept towards the sound, my heart racing. As I peered around the tree, I saw the cloaked man dragging a large sack. It looked like the sack was moving. Something was kicking from inside. The cloaked man turned his head slightly as if to look over his shoulder. I ducked back behind the tree, my heart beating out my chest. I hope he didn't see me. And what or who was in that sack? I slowly peered around the tree, terrified but still curious. The man was gone. My mind raced. I thought of the girl in the window of the old brewery. What if that wasn't his daughter? I ran through the forest back to my uncle's house. I barged through the door calling for my uncle for help, but no one was home. He must be at the tavern again, I thought. This time, I ran out the front door and the 5 miles towards the tavern in the village as fast as my legs could carry me. I arrived at the tavern in a frenzy. "Where's my uncle?" I demanded at a man behind the bar. "Who's your uncle?" the man replied. "William McGregor," I pleaded. "There's no one here that goes by that name," he replied. Maybe I missed him coming into the village. He might be back at home by now. I couldn't take any chances and ran towards the local police station. When I arrived, I told the officer everything. The officer paused. "You haven't seen much, have you?" He smirked at me. The officer told me he would investigate and noted my address. I left the police station and began the long, tedious journey back to my uncle's. My legs were aching when I arrived. I entered the house and once again called out for my uncle. As I approached the lounge, I could see my uncle slumped in the old dusty armchair by the fire, sobbing. "Uncle!" I called. My uncle looked up, eyes still wet from tears. I told my uncle everything I had seen in the forest, the cloaked man, the girl, the moving sack. "You have no proof," said my uncle, and with those words ringing in my ears, he stood up, walked towards his bedroom door, and slammed it shut behind him. The next day, I waited for the police officer to arrive at the old brewery, but no one ever did. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find out who was in that old brewery for myself. I sneaked around the back entrance. The brewery was ramshackled. Moss and ivy grew up the crumbling walls. How could anyone reside in such a dilapidated building? As I approached the door, I could hear a faint voice coming from the other side. "Help us," the voice wailed. I nervously creaked open the door and stepped inside. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloomy room. I took a few steps forward. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. "Help us!" the voice cried, closer this time. At the end of the room, I could make out stairs leading down to the old brewery cellar. I slowly made my way towards the stairs. It was so dark, it took a few seconds to make out the walls of the cellar. Along each wall was a line of girls, with their backs facing me, hands bound together by chains. One of the girls turned around and looked at me, her face pale and gaunt. "Help us," pleaded the girl. "He's too powerful." The girl was wearing a dirty old nightdress. She had open sores over her arms and legs. The girl had a number carved onto her forehead. As I approached the girl, all of the others turned towards me. They all had carvings on their foreheads, numbered 1 to 65. "He's collecting us," said the girl. "Once he has collected 66, he will kill us all and open the portal to the gates of hell." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced. What can I do? I thought desperately. The only way to stop him is to offer your blood to the binding trees. I had always stayed away from the binding trees. It was an eerie place deep in the forest. The girl told me I must make a blood offering to stop the portal from opening. Just as the girl had finished speaking, I heard the doors to the brewery bang shut. I heard footsteps. Shh! Don't let him see you, they all said. It's that man, I said. He's not a man. He's the devil. My spine tingled. There's an unlocked window upstairs, said the girls. Get out. I crept slowly up the cellar stairs, hoping the creature wouldn't see me. I reached the top of the stairs and felt a chill run all over my body. It's in here, I thought, too terrified to look up. I ran to the unlocked window and made my way out, eyes squinting in the daylight. I ran back to my uncle's, legs buckling with terror. I must get my uncle out of here and help those girls. I swung open the front door, slamming it shut behind me, blocking it with my body. Uncle, I sobbed. I looked down at my feet and saw I was standing on a letter, sealed by a red wax stamp. I took a bread knife from the table beside me and cut open the seal. I began to read. The letter was from the police officer. It stated that no one lived at the old brewery, and my uncle was found 2 years ago, drowned in the river. I should leave the house immediately. I froze. The letter fell to the ground. The room started to spin. I felt dizzy. The room was cold again, icy cold. I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I was frozen in fear. The window smashed and the door slammed open and shut behind me. The footsteps were coming down the stairs. I jumped through the broken window, cutting my hand on the broken glass as I fled. I could hear the voices all around me. To the tree, they called. Leave me alone, I sobbed, stumbling through the forest. I arrived at a clearing and saw what looked like an old tomb. Around the tomb were the 65 girls in chains chanting, Offer your blood to the binding tree. I hid my face in my hands. No! I screamed. As I looked back at the tomb, the girls had vanished. I almost couldn't breathe as I turned and ran further into the forest. I stumbled on some branches and fell to my knees. I was kneeling in front of the binding tree. I looked up and saw the cloaked dark figure standing in front of me. This time it stared directly into my eyes. As I stared back at the creature's fiery red eyes, it smiled at me, revealing its sharp, flesh-tearing teeth. The creature contorted its body into all fours like an animal and scurried up the tree. I looked up and saw its red eyes peering at me from between the leaves. It slowly stretched out its serpent-like arm, slithering between the branches. It reached out towards me, and then everything turned to darkness. I slowly opened my eyes. I was strapped to a hospital bed and wearing a hospital gown. The police officer and a nurse were standing over the bed. Where am I? I stuttered. The best place for people like you, the officer replied. I screamed. The officer pushed my head back onto the pillow. I felt the sharp prick of a needle in my neck. Then everything went black. So, as we come to the end of our tale, I would like to thank you for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Comment below if you enjoyed the twist. Did you figure it out? Do you enjoy scary stories with a twist ending? Let us